A waitress was about to have her baby, and the billionaire doctor was her ex-husband. Then he did something amazing. What if the person who broke your heart was the only one who could save you when you needed help the most? Grace wiped down the same dirty table for the third time. Her big, pregnant belly made it harder to bend over each day that passed. The bright lights in Murphy's diner buzzed above her head, making dark shadows across her tired face. At 35 years old, she never thought she'd be 8 months pregnant, working 2 shifts in a row just to pay rent, while her ex-husband lived in a huge house across town. It was strange to think that David had become everything he'd promised he would be during their marriage. A successful doctor, super rich, respected by everyone who knew him. Everything except a husband who stayed. The bell above the diner door rang, and Grace looked up from her cleaning, expecting another late-night customer wanting coffee and pie. Instead, she froze. After 3 years of carefully staying away from each other in their small town, David Chen stood in the doorway. His expensive suit looked completely out of place among the old plastic seats. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Grace's hand automatically moved to her belly as David's eyes met hers across the empty diner. The last time they'd talked was in a lawyer's office, signing papers that ended 8 years of marriage with nothing more than signatures on a line. Now here he was, his dark hair slightly gray at the sides, looking exactly like the successful heart surgeon he'd become. She remembered when he used to practice stitching on oranges at their kitchen table, dreaming of the day he'd save lives for a living. "Grace," he said softly, his voice carrying the same gentle sound that once made her feel like the most important person in the world. "I heard about—" His eyes dropped to her belly, and she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe even pain. "About what exactly?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady while untying her apron. Her shift had ended 20 minutes ago, but she'd been putting off the moment when she'd have to walk to her beat-up Honda in the parking lot, knowing it might not start again. David stepped closer, his shiny shoes clicking against the checkered floor. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you were expecting. I needed to see if you were okay." The worry in his voice almost broke her. This was the David she'd fallen in love with in college, the one who'd stay up all night when she had the flu, the one who'd drive across town just to bring her favorite soup when she was stressed about tests. But that David had also been the one who'd chosen his career over their marriage, who'd missed anniversaries and birthdays because surgery ran late, who'd looked at her one day and said maybe they wanted different things from life. Grace's lower back hurt as she reached for her purse. "I'm fine, David, just like I've been fine for the past 3 years. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't completely true. The medical bills from her pregnancy had been piling up. Her landlord had been calling about late rent. And the father of her baby, a short relationship that ended when he decided he wasn't ready for commitment, had disappeared the moment she told him the news. As if right on cue, a sharp pain shot through her stomach, and Grace grabbed the edge of the counter, her face going pale. David was beside her in an instant. His trained hands were gentle but firm as he steadied her. "Grace, when was your last checkup?" The doctor in him had taken over, his eyes looking at her face for signs of trouble. "I'm fine," she insisted. But another wave of pain made her gasp. She'd been having what she thought were practice contractions all day, but this felt different, sharper, more serious. "You're not fine," David said quietly, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No!" Grace's voice was sharper than she meant it to be. "Do you have any idea what that costs?" "I can't afford—" She stopped herself, embarrassed by admitting it. The David she'd been married to would never have understood money worries. They'd always been comfortable, if not happy. Something changed in David's expression. A flicker of the old kindness breaking through his professional manner. "Grace, money isn't—" He stopped, seeming to remember that for her it absolutely was a problem. "Let me drive you to the hospital. My car's right outside." She wanted to say no, to keep the dignity she'd worked so hard to build since their divorce. But another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Grace found herself nodding as David helped her to his sleek black car. She caught sight of herself in the window's reflection, tired, worn down, nothing like the bright-eyed graduate student he'd married. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her now. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital was quiet, except for Grace's occasional sharp breaths. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and she noticed he'd taken off his wedding ring. When had that happened? She'd kept hers in a drawer for months after the divorce, unable to throw it away, but unwilling to wear it. "Grace," David said as they pulled into the emergency entrance. "The baby's father, is he—" "He's not in the picture," she replied shortly, not wanting to admit how alone she really was, how she'd been going to pregnancy appointments by herself, putting together a crib in her tiny apartment with instructions she could barely read through her tears. As another contraction gripped her, stronger and more insistent than before, Grace realized with growing alarm that this might not be false labor after all. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up, and as David helped her from the car, she couldn't help but wonder if fate had brought him back into her life at the exact moment she needed him most, or if this was just another cruel twist in a story that never seemed to have a happy ending. The emergency room doors slid open, and David's entire manner changed. This was his world, his place, and watching him in action reminded Grace why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. He spoke quickly with the nurse at the desk, his medical credentials opening doors that would have kept Grace waiting for hours. "She's at 36 weeks," David explained to Dr. Martinez, the attending physician. "Contractions started about 40 minutes ago, coming every 8 minutes now." Grace was amazed at how he'd been timing them without her even realizing it. As they wheeled her into an examination room, Grace felt a strange mix of gratitude and heartbreak. David had always been like this, competent, caring, completely focused when someone needed help. It was one of the things that had made him such a gifted surgeon and such an absent husband. He could save lives, but he'd never learned how to simply be there for the small everyday moments that marriage required. "Grace," Dr. Martinez said gently after examining her, "you're in active labor. This baby is coming tonight." The words hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't ready. Not financially, not emotionally, not practically. Her hospital bag was at home. Her tiny apartment wasn't properly prepared, and she didn't even have anyone to call. Her parents had died in a car accident 2 years after her divorce, and her few close friends lived hours away. David seemed to sense her panic. "Dr. Martinez, I'd like to request permission to assist with the delivery," he said quietly. "I'm Dr. Chen, heart surgery. She's my ex-wife." The admission hung in the air between them. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes, not from physical pain, but from realizing that even after everything that had gone wrong between them, David was still trying to take care of her. "David, you don't have to," she started, but he shook his head. "Yes, I do," he said simply. "I should have taken care of you better when I had the chance." Another contraction gripped her, and this time, David reached for her hand. His touch was warm, familiar, and for a moment, Grace allowed herself to remember what it felt like to not face everything alone. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. As the medical team prepared for delivery, Grace couldn't help but wonder if this baby would be the bridge that finally brought healing to two hearts that had never quite learned how to stop loving each other, even when love hadn't been enough to keep them together. The delivery room was filled with soft light as Grace gripped David's hand through another contraction somewhere between the emergency room and this moment. Her walls had come down, the fear, the pride, the hurt from their divorce. None of it mattered now as they faced this miracle together. "You're doing beautifully," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He'd seen thousands of medical procedures, but nothing had prepared him for watching the woman he'd never stopped loving bring new life into the world. Dr. Martinez looked up from her position. "I can see the head, Grace. One more big push." Grace squeezed David's hand so hard she was sure she'd break his fingers. But he didn't flinch. "I can't," she gasped, exhaustion overwhelming her. "Yes, you can," David said firmly, and suddenly she was 22 again, sitting in their tiny apartment while he encouraged her through final exams. "You're the strongest person I know, Grace. You always have been." With a final push and a cry that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, Grace brought her daughter into the world. The baby's first cry filled the room, and Grace sobbed with relief and joy as Dr. Martinez placed the tiny, perfect infant on her chest. "She's beautiful," David breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Grace, she's absolutely perfect." As Grace held her daughter for the first time, she noticed David had gone very quiet. She looked up to see him staring at the baby with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Wonder? Certainly, but something deeper, too. David?" she asked softly. He met her eyes, and what she saw there took her breath away. "Grace, I need to tell you something. When we were married, when you wanted to start a family..." He paused, struggling with words. "I was scared, terrified actually. I thought I'd be a terrible father, that I'd fail you both the way I felt like I was already failing as a husband." Grace's heart hurt for the pain in his voice. "David, I've regretted that decision every single day since our divorce, he continued. And seeing you tonight, seeing her... He reached out carefully, and Grace guided his finger to their daughter's tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his, and David's composure finally cracked completely. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As Grace watched the man she'd once planned to spend forever with fall in love with her daughter, she felt something shift in her heart, not just forgiveness, but the possibility that some stories could have second chances, after all. 3 months later, Grace pushed the stroller through the doors of Murphy's Diner. Little Lily was sleeping peacefully despite the familiar buzz of the bright lights. The diner looked exactly the same, but everything else in Grace's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. "Well, look who's here," called out Betty, the longtime owner, coming out from behind the counter with a huge smile. "And this must be the little princess we've all been hearing about." Grace smiled, remembering how different things had been that night David had walked through these doors. After Lily's birth, he'd quietly taken care of all her hospital bills, and when Grace had protested, he'd simply said it was what any friend would do. Friend. They'd had to learn how to be that again, carefully rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. The bell rang, and Grace turned to see David entering, still in his surgical scrubs, but with a smile that had become increasingly common over the past few months. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing Grace's cheek before bending to look at Lily. Surgery ran longer than expected. It was such an ordinary moment, yet Grace marveled at how different it felt from their marriage. Back then, his late nights had felt like rejection. Now, she understood them for what they were. A man doing work he loved, saving lives, making a difference. The difference was that now he made sure to show up for the moments that mattered most. "She's been perfect," Grace said, watching as David carefully lifted their daughter from the stroller, seeing him with Lily never failed to amaze her. This man who could perform complex heart surgery was completely undone by a baby's smile. They'd been taking things slowly, going to counseling, learning how to communicate better. David had sold his mansion and bought a modest house closer to town, with a yard perfect for a little girl to play in someday. Grace had gone back to school part-time, studying to become a nurse with David, watching Lily on his days off. They weren't rushing toward marriage again. They'd both learned that love alone wasn't enough without understanding, compromise, and the willingness to put family first. But they were building something new together, something stronger, because it was built on the foundation of who they'd become, rather than who they'd once been. As they settled into their usual booth, Lily gurgling happily in her father's arms, Grace felt a deep sense of peace. Sometimes the best stories weren't about perfect love, but about love that learned to grow, to forgive, to become something better than it was before. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining Grace and David on their journey of second chances. May we all believe that it's never too late for love to find its way.